on the United Fruit Company and American influence in Central America, with a specific focus on the case of Guatemala. Introduction. I will uncover the profound impact that the United States government and corporate entities had on Central America during the late 19th and 20th centuries, forever shaping this region. Although my presentation centers around Guatemala, it is important to acknowledge that similar dynamics reverberated across Central and Latin America. This compelling case study serves as a powerful testament to the consequences that unfold when corporate and political interests become entwined. History of the United Fruit Company. This is just going to be a short overview and history of the United Fruit Company. So, the United Fruit Company started as the Boston Fruit Company, and after undergoing a series of mergers, it ultimately ended up forming the United Fruit Company. And throughout its history, this company wielded significant influence over the countries in which it operated. One of the most notable mergers that occurred, though, was in 1929 when the United Fruit Company merged with the Cuyamel Fruit Company, further solidifying its dominance in Central America. The reason that the Cuyamel Fruit Company is important is because of its CEO that came along when the merger occurred and became the CEO of United Fruit. His name was Sam Zimuri. He was a Russian Jew who immigrated to the U.S. in his teenage years, and Zimuri learned about the banana trade while working in Alabama. He was a very shrewd entrepreneur who started off by purchasing ripe bananas that no one wanted because of the lack of refrigeration technology. He would end up amassing significant wealth doing this, and enough wealth actually to acquire the Cuyamel Fruit Company. Because of this is how he earned his moniker, Sam the Banana Man. Um, he would eventually end up uh, relocating the company's operations to Honduras, where he would start a banana plantation and develop essential infrastructure, including railroads, roads, electrical lines, and telegraph lines to better facilitate the transport of his bananas. One important thing to note during this time is Honduras' very broken and corrupt tax system. Fruit companies were known to have paid bribes to government officials in order to avoid taxes. However, eventually Honduras' debt became so large, and the U.S. feared foreign invasion in Central America. In order to prevent this, they contacted J.P. Morgan to purchase the debt of Honduras. J.P. Morgan agreed to do so only if they could send tax officials or their bankers as tax officials to collect on this debt. However, Zimuri not wanting to pay taxes orchestrated a coup d'etat with the aid of mercenaries and the ex-president of Honduras. This event foreshadows the future developments in Latin America and highlights the start of corporate interest in Central America. Role of the United Fruit Company in Central America. As mentioned previously, corporations like the Cuyamel Fruit Company and the United Fruit Company played a substantial role in constructing much of Central America's infrastructure to facilitate the transport of its products, such as bananas. It's worth noting that these companies have enjoyed significant tax exemption or minimal tax burdens due to bribery and government complicity. This meant they would end up developing large monopolies over infrastructure and land in Central America. And below you'll see an advertisement made by the United Fruit Company that detailed the banana life cycle, everything from the planting of the banana tree to its harvesting to its transport through railroad and cargo ships. And on the right, you'll see a Guatemalan newspaper clipping that shows the dangers of the monopoly that the fruit corporations held at the time. You'll see an octopus representing the corporation's monopoly over the banana plantations, railroads, electricity lines, and naval dockyards. Jacob Arbenz and the Agrarian Reform Law, also known as Decree 900. In 1944, a military junta overthrew Guatemala's dictatorship, leading to free elections. In this election, President Juan Jose Abreu was elected. Once his term ended, uh, the second round of democratic elections were held, and in these elections, Jacob Arbenz emerged as the new president of Guatemala. Jacob Arbenz campaigned on progressive policies and, most notably, the Agrarian Reform Law. This law aimed to reform and redistribute land holdings, ensuring that land was more equitably distributed among the population. To understand the significance of the Green Reform Law, we need to examine the graph on the left, which illustrates a distribution of land holdings in Guatemala. The white portion represents manzanas, a unit of measurement equivalent to 1.7 acres, while the orange represents fincas, which are estates or ranches owned by individuals. As you see, the land holdings were incredibly unevenly distributed. The blue section of the pie chart in the bottom right indicates that only 2.2% of the fincas owned a staggering 72.2% of all the farming land in Guatemala. The graph also reveals that merely 22 fincas possess 13% of the land in all of Guatemala. This data highlights the engrossed imbalance in land ownership, fueling the urgency for agrarian reform. It's worth noting that much of the land owned by the United Fruit Company and other fruit companies was unused. The agrarian reform law proposed expropriating such lands and compensating the companies with bonds that paid 3% interest. Unsurprisingly, this did not align with the interests of the United Fruit Company and other fruit companies, leading to their opposition to reform. It's important to contextualize that this was within the post World War II era and the Cold War era, where United Fruit capitalized on the fears of communism spreading in Latin America and influenced the U.S. government to take action against Arbenz government. Operation PB Success. Under the pretense of stopping communist spread in Central and Latin America, Operation PB Success was a brazen operation conducted by the CIA to overthrow the government of President Arbenz. The operation included meticulous planning and execution. Its objectives were destabilizing the Arbenz government, discrediting his administration, and ultimately removing him from power. The CIA used various tactics, including propaganda campaigns and uh, training and supporting opposition groups within Guatemala. It was a multifaceted effort aimed at undermining the legitimacy of Arben's government and instigating internal division. One key aspect of Operation PB success was the decimation of propaganda painting Arbenz and his administration of as communist sympathizer. The United Fruit Company played a significant role in influencing the American government and public opinion, fueling the fear of communist infiltration in Latin America. The company's extensive resources and lobbying efforts were instrumental in shaping the narrative surrounding Arben's government and justifying intervention. To further destabilize the situation, the CIA provided support to rebel forces, including training, arms, and financial assistance. The system contributed to growing armed opposition that posed a threat to the Arben's government. Ultimately, Operation PP success achieved its objective. President Arbenz was forced to resign, and Carlos Castilla, a military officer supported by the CIA, assumed power. The operating success demonstrated that the effectiveness of brazen interventions in shaping the political landscape of foreign nations. Aftermath of PB success. The immediate aftermath of Operation PB success witnessed significant changes in Guatemala's political landscape. With the ousting of President Arbenz, a democratically elected official, and the installation of Carlos Castillo Armas, a U.S. backed military officer, the country experienced numerous challenges that would ultimately lead to unintended outcomes. Ironically, despite the operation aimed to counter communism, the repeal of Arben's progressive policies, and particularly the agrarian reform law, had unforeseen consequences. Arben's reforms aimed to address the profound social and economic inequalities in Guatemala by redistributing land to peasants and agricultural workers. By repealing these reforms, the new government undermined the progress made in addressing land concentration and social inequality. This created a breeding ground for discontent, disillusionment, and particularly among marginalized communities. Moreover, the replacement of Arbenz with the US backed leader, seen by many as a puppet of foreign interests, eroded public trust in the government. The perception of Guatemala being under the control of external forces fueled resentment and deepened the division within society. In addition, the new government reliance on U.S. aid and its subservient relationship with the United States further exacerbated internal tensions. The close tie between U.S. and Castillo Armas reign reinforced the perception that Guatemala's sovereignty had been compromised. The perception that this perception, coupled with the repeal of progressive laws, alienated significant sections of the population, leading to a rise in new opposition movements, most significantly left-wing and communist groups. The removal of armaments and the subsequent dismantling of his progressive policy left a void that these groups sought to fill. The repeal of the agrarian reform law in particular was seen as a betrayal of the peasant and working class populations who had supported armaments. This disillusionment and the ensuing social-economic disparities provided fertile ground for leftist ideologies to gain traction among marginalized groups. The legacy of Operation PB success in Guatemala was marked by a protracted and brutal civil war that spanned from 1960 to 1996. This conflict pitted left-wing guerrilla groups against the U.S.-backed Guatemalan government, resulting in a devastating toll on the nation and its people. The civil war in Guatemala claimed the lives of over 200,000 individuals, with countless others suffering displacement, trauma, and loss. It became a battleground for competing ideologies and interests, perpetuating a cycle of violence that scarred the nation for generations. Both sides in this conflict committed atrocities and human rights violations. However, it is estimated that 93% of these violations were perpetrated by the government forces, which received significant support from the US government. The widespread abuse included massacres, forced disappearance, torture, and targeting of indigenous communities. Such egregious violation of human rights only further deepened the wounds of the Guatemalan people and eroded the trust in the government. The impact of the Civil War extended far beyond the loss of lives and immediate violence. It also exhibited existing social economic inequalities, contributing to a legacy of systematic corruption, poverty, and social fragmentation. The Civil War also disrupted essential services and infrastructure, hindering development and perpetuating cycles of poverty and marginalization. The scars of the conflict still linger in Guatemalan society today. Communities continue to grapple with the aftermath, seeking justice, healing, and reconciliation. The profound lack of trust in the government among citizens persists as many bear the weight of atrocities committed during the war and the ongoing challenges in its aftermath. It is crucial to acknowledge the consequences of Operation PB success and the subsequent civil war, as they have left a permanent mark on Guatemalan history and society. Rebuilding trust, fostering inclusive development, and promoting social justice remain ongoing challenges that require sustained efforts from both domestic and international actors. Takeaways: the case of the United Fruit Company and its influence in Guatemala provide valuable insights into the complex dynamics of corporate interest, political intervention, and the long-term social economic repercussions on a nation. It serves as a cautionary tale reminding us of the detrimental consequences that can arise when a powerful corporation prioritizes profit over social well-being and when geopolitical interests shape the destiny of a nation. As we reflect on this history, it's imperative that we acknowledge the need for responsible corporate practices, transparency, and accountability. Companies must consider the social, economic, and environmental impacts of their actions in the regions they operate. Governments and international institutions should prioritize sovereignty, equitable development, and the well being of local communities. Additionally, the case of Guatemala underscores the importance of inclusive governance, respect for human rights, and the pursuit of social justice. It highlights the enduring impact of armed conflict on societies, the deep scars left by violence, and the imperative of healing, reconciliation, and the building of sustainable peace. By learning from the past and recognizing the complexities of these issues, we can work towards a future where interests of corporations align with the well being of communities, where geopolitical intervention prioritizes justice and human rights, and where nations can pursue their own paths and development and self determination. Thank you.